Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to speak probably for 30 minutes or so, and then we'll do some questions. If you want to butt in and it's really burning, do so, but it's probably better to let me ramble through what I'm going to talk about, because I'll probably pick up your point a bit later on. I don't use slides. I rely totally on me to keep you engaged for that 30 minutes, and it's quite important that I keep going. So if you do ask me a question, I get thrown and I have to sort of scamper over to some notes. But let me kick off by just looking at this subject, preparing Britain's high streets and town centres for the 21st century. That's a big subject, and something that's going to take us as a society through a journey which, if we're not careful and we don't get it right, we're going to impact our entire economy. Because I'm going to make a statement now: the British High Street is a mirror image of the UK economy. We are a consumer-based country. We no longer dominate the world in manufacturing. We've been through all of that stuff. And we're now a consumer-based in a consumer-based environment. We're also very American in the way that we do things. We saw that last Friday with Asda bringing out the Black Friday because they're Walmart owned. John Lewis even followed suit. How ridiculous is that? But that's the way we are, and we have to face into it. But let's just kick off with starting at the very beginning, because I became a retailer when I was 4, and I used to go shopping with my mother every day, because you had to in those days, because if you didn't, the food went off because there wasn't a fridge. And that's the stark reality. You had larders with air bricks to look after food. And her social media was her shopping trip. Now, social media is not a new subject. It's just got a different vehicle called a mobile device and a phone. But my mother had her social media every day, 2 hours it used to take, and it was a fascinating journey through the fishmonger, through the butcher, through the baker, greengrocer, international stores which existed in those days, sweet shop used to get treated, and I just used to be aghast with colour, vibrancy, selling, trading, and all that kind of stuff that just kind of appealed to me. And when I was old enough to work in shops, I started. And 45 years later, I'm now in what I think is commonly known as transition. I'm trying to go through a transition in life from working to this retirement sort of stuff. Now, playing golf bores me silly, and so I did some things in the last couple of years which I'm going to talk about in a moment, like writing a book and writing a review of the High Street, which is going to be the main topic of what I'm speaking about. But before we do that, in order to understand what we need to do to prepare ourselves for the High Street of the 21st century, I'm a great believer that you can only know where you are today and where you need to go tomorrow by learning lessons from the past. Now, it's not a trait that human beings are very good at, because as we grow up, we all know it best. We don't necessarily want to listen to the people who've done it before and learn from them, and we make the same mistakes again. But that's silly, and if people did look back in time, they would see some things that happened that could help them try and assimilate what is actually going to happen in the next few years. So I'm just going to take a journey back in time and just hit some milestones which will show how the very fabric and structure of towns and high streets has changed in my career, just my career, nothing else. Because when I started, there were pounds, shillings and pence, and used to price things with a thing called a plonker. Okay, now a plonker was a plastic thing with a It's funny, isn't it? There's block with a price on the bottom, and you stamp all the products. And when the price changes, you get out some methylated spirits and you rub it out and you price it again. And that's where I started. If you roll forward the camera to when I decided to stop at the end of 2011, it was a totally different world. And I'm just going to hit the big highlights in that time that changed the world. And the starting point is that self-service supermarkets started in this country in 1947 in St Albans was the first one. It was a Tesco. And here we are in 2013, and we're dominated by 4 out-of-town supermarkets. There wasn't 4 back then, there were loads of companies across the country. We went through a consolidation as size and scale really mattered. And we went out of town. In the 80s was the first time it really happened. And as we did that, we did the first big milestone of change to the way in which we buy foodstuffs, essentially. That's the starting point in this country. And we had what they call a fresh food revolution. Now, you may not associate with that, but I can assure you that prior to that revolution, you could only get strawberries in this country 6 weeks a year. You could only get mashed potato in the winter, and you used to look forward to those first Jersey Royals in March with the butter on them, having had a winter of mash. That's a fact. The roads were covered with lorries, Walls lorries, Edenvale, Ski Yoghurt, Unigate, Bowyer's sausages, bread vans, all over the country. And then almost bang overnight, the supermarkets went back in their supply chains, did multi-temperature distribution centres, vehicles that had movable compartments, and they changed the whole supply chain. They then flew stuff in from abroad, and now you can buy strawberries all year round. My granddaughter thinks strawberries are available every day of the year, but she doesn't know that they're flown in from the Middle East every day of the year. So that whole revolution wiped out a whole species of van salesmen. And they weren't particularly nice guys, but they all got wiped out. Then came another revolution, which was no bigger than a postage stamp, and it was called a barcode. And with the introduction of that barcode, it switched the retail industry in this country sideways. Because up to that time, the balance of power in our industry was controlled by manufacturers. They did all the research. They did the customer research, they did the marketing, they did the advertising, and they told you as a retailer what you should stock, what price you should sell it at, because they're doing this TV ad next week and we've got this offer on next week. They controlled it. Heinz, Birdseye, Colgate, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, they ran the country. And then almost overnight, information switched from them to the retailer, who captured all this information at the point of sale through this barcode. Now, information is power. And what happened is that initially the retailers, being retailers, a bit slow sometimes we're traders, you know. So we've got all this information, we'll sell it to the suppliers. So we started to sell it. And then after about 6 months we realised, hang on a minute, we shouldn't be selling this, it's more valuable to us than them. So we stopped all that, and then we controlled what we stocked, we controlled the supply chain, we introduced own labels, and we basically wiped out a lot of brands. Some prevailed, and there are certain sectors where brands have really stuck in. Health and beauty is one. But mostly the supermarkets, because of that barcode information, they wiped it out. The next big milestone was www. in the early 90s. And when that changed the way that all industries operated, and it enabled online shopping. Now, online shopping and the dot-com boom had a false start in the late 90s, made a few people multi-millionaires for doing nothing, which is kind of another subject about capitalism and the way it works, but we'll shelve that because that could go on all night. The fact is, it had a false start and it didn't really get off the ground. Roll forward the clock to the mid to late noughties and it's a different story altogether. And now online shopping is going to change the way in which Britain looks immeasurably. And that's what we've got to appreciate, is that in a very short period of time, 40 years, the change from pounds, shillings and pence to what we've got today is massive. And I can tell you that 40 years of change will happen in the next 20 years. So change and pace of change will be faster. And you can expect to see a pace of change of that nature coming. So, having got to where we are today, let's think about what that might mean. I mean, how did we get here? There's all sorts of arguments that says, well, it was the supermarkets that, are to blame for what's happened and why we haven't got our high streets where my mum used to take me and have her social networking. And they're the bad guys. Well, that's all nonsense. And this is the advert. This book I wrote it's my first year of transition to retirement. It's called Sold Out, Who Really Killed the High Street. Is a walk through my history, and it reaches a conclusion. And the conclusion is that the people that killed the high street are you, me, and the consumer. We just plainly don't want it anymore. And that's a fact. Now, you're going to hear, as time goes by, you'll hear this a lot. Oh, we want our high street back. Oh, we love to have it back. It's all reminiscing nonsense. They don't want it back. So if they wanted it back, they would shop there. Okay? It's a bit like people saying, oh, we want to be thin. We want to be healthy. Can the supermarkets put adverts on their products? Actually, take control of it yourself and deal with it yourself is the answer. Don't look to other people to do it for you. And it's kind of like that with the high street. If a community wants the high street to prevail, they have to do something about it as a community. And I'm going to touch on that in a moment. So it's all about going forward as to what we are going to be doing as consumers as time changes. Now, at the end of 2011, the government, this current government, commissioned Mary Portas to do a review of the high street and town centres. And I, for one, really thought that was great. I thought, at last, somebody's going to get hold of this issue and start to understand it and the structural changes that are about to happen and the impact on communities and society as we go forward is going to be huge, and it's all going to get highlighted. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. As with this particular coalition, I think there's been a lot of headlining going on and a lot of headlines grabbed to demonstrate that they're doing the right things. And Mary Portas, being a celebrity as well as somebody who knows about retailing, I'm not going to knock her retailing necessarily, but she was a celebrity. I'm afraid if you use celebrities to do something, you get the kind of hype that we got around this, and it results in a TV show which frankly was little more than reality TV. There is no fix for a high street in Margate, I assure you, by getting Chaz and Dave to go down there and play a piano. It isn't going to work. I've been all over Margate, and I can tell you the town centre has had it. It is not going to come back as a retail destination ever. That is a fact. It is circled by the best retail park you can find anywhere, with all the kind of things people want, with free parking. It's going to have a Tesco come on the beachfront, which is going to have everything they want, and it's got acres and acres of space in the town centre. It's all empty and quite scary, I can tell you. And it's never, ever going to get filled up by traders. So you can reminisce all you like, but there's a challenge. How are you going to prepare Margate for the 21st century? So I was quite upset about the fact that we were getting Chaz and Dave to fix Margate. Peppa Pig was employed with some of the Portas money at another town. And you're going to have another one of these gimmicks on Saturday. It's called the Small Shop Saturday. You know, it's all a bit American and it's a bit one-day-ish, and yeah, everyone's going to flood there on Saturday and then they're going to go back to their old habits on Monday. So there needs to be something a little bit more solid about what we're facing in order to address the challenges that are about to come. So I started to lob, rather like the guy that describes my book, hand grenades at Mary Portas and the government, saying, I just think this is appalling, guys. There's a bigger issue here. You're not getting to the detail of what's going on, and you're not giving the right recommendations to government and to local authorities in order to address the issue that they face. And as a consequence of that, we eventually had a spat at one seminar where I asked a question of Mary Portas, who was the keynote speaker, from the floor, and she flew at me, lost her temper, and it got in the press, and I came out and I said to some associates, we need to put up or shut up, because it's easy to criticise, but why don't we write the review that we think should have been written in 2011? So we got together, and there are 9 of us that did this, and we wrote what is now known as the Grimsey Review. Now let me tell you, first of all, it's just another review that joins the stack of reviews that are being out. There's another one out on Friday, by the way. This is a government review. And there's going to be more to come. But nevertheless, that's a starting point. And that's where I want to pick up the story now. And the real meat of what I want to talk about is, how do we prepare our towns and high streets for the 21st century? And we think the clue is in some of this stuff in here. Now some of you may have read it. I'm going to reference it, so if you have read it from cover to cover, you might want to go out for an early dinner. But I'm going to reference what's in here, because this is the meat of what we believe should happen. Let's just start with the size of the sector, shall we? It's huge. If I told you there are 95,000 companies engaged in our high street and town centres in one way or another, whether that be a retailer or it be in the supply chain in this country, it's a massive, massive business. It employs 326 billion of gross assets. It borrows some 65 billion, so it creates a financial market, and has a total net worth of 135 billion as an industry, as a sector. Now, if you think about that for a second, that means it compares with the education budget, which is only 53 billion, the defence budget's 24 billion, business innovation and skills budget's just a mere 13 billion, and even the national health is only 110 billion. So as a important part of our country, it's huge. And yet, we don't have a minister sitting round the cabinet table responsible for high streets and town centres. Now that in itself is totally unacceptable, and it should be reversed. And so that formed one of the recommendations in this review, and that should have come out in 2011 in my view. It was so good, that recommendation, that 6 weeks after putting it out, the government demoted the High Street to a junior minister in his portfolio called Brandon Lewis, and basically pushed it to one side. So it is not yet being taken seriously. And when you think about the fact that there are 40,000 SMEs out there in this sector, of which 46.6% are in grave danger of going bust right now. In other words, they're on a company watch indicator that we use, where their liabilities outstrip their assets on their balance sheet to the extent that they are likely to go bust in the next 6 to 9 months. Now that's a huge piece of turn and churn and devastation that is poised to happen, and yet we don't have any central minister fighting for the health of our town centres and high streets. So that needed to be reversed, but hasn't. If you then take it one stage further and say, well, okay, let's assume they're not going to do anything about it. What can we do with government to try and shake them a bit and get them to realise that actually your fiscal policy in the UK and everything that you are going to do as a government, if you focused on your towns and the microeconomies that surround towns and get economic blueprints in place that get thriving, vibrant towns moving again, you might actually get the economy back on its feet. Now that's pretty difficult to do when you're adopting an austere programme that is based on basically saving your way to prosperity, and I'm not going to go into the economics of that, but I do happen to like Will Hutton, who's a Keynesian disciple, and for those of you that know what that means, it means that this current policy is doomed for failure. There is no recovery going on at the moment, by the way. That's all political propaganda. This country is based on the consumer society, and it did go through a revival in the summer. And what drove that was the sun. People were fed up with 4 years of bad summers and being in austere programs. And if you look at what happened to savings in the summer, they went down considerably. And so people treated themselves in the summer. So savings went down. The rest of it, where people treated themselves, was Alice in Wonderland. That's what happened there, and the Wonga, the payday loan people had a bonanza throughout August and September. So, and you will see, and you're starting to see, although there's people keep saying manufacturing's recovering, okay, it's all relative, it's a bit. You will see that the November figures and October figures and November figures for retailing are at best flatlining, and they are headed into a pretty tough December. And watch out for some more casualties in January. They are coming. Now, it's not about doom and gloom, but that's a fact. Now, one of the other things that happened when Mary Portas did her review is that she failed to point out that these structural changes were around the corner, and 8 major companies went bust since she published it. So our contention was, government, you need to wake up to the fact that this is happening. So we did this review, and we did it as a fact-based review, and we reached 3 conclusions. And they are that first and foremost, town centres, high streets of the future must encompass a complete community hub solution incorporating health, housing, education, arts, entertainment, business, office space, manufacturing and leisure, whilst developing daytime, evening time and nighttime cultures. And there will be, if you do that, you get populations back into the towns, some shops. Okay, so we're not saying there won't be shops in the town centres, but there'll be fewer shops if you take this approach. Now, if you try and save the shops, you won't save the town. You need to save the town as a community hub. It's a slightly different direction. The second conclusion we reached is that government need to take some radical action right now in order to provide some oxygen to what is going on out there, in order to give us a fighting chance to make the changes that need to happen. So there's some immediate action. They need to level the playing field by providing controls for town centres to facilitate change, enable them to change use of properties, cut through red tape, and enable local authorities to make the right decisions in an easier fashion. And then finally, the third thing that they need to do is they need a methodology and a timetable to get local authorities to produce a plan. Now, here's the interesting statistic. They are supposed to have plans in place for the future. And we went out with a Freedom of Information request, and we did 100 local authorities, and less than half of them have a plan at all. It's not surprising, because if you look at the government document to do these plans, you get bored by page 2. I mean, it is just appalling. It is not easy, it's not simple, it's just administrative nonsense. So less than half of them have a plan, and those that do have a plan, it's not particularly robust. So the big thing to call for is not a town team that is ill-defined, is idea-driven, can be 10 people, or in the case of Stockport, 210 people, each with a vote. You can imagine how things get done there, can't you? It's not that kind of thing, which is enthusiasm and idea-driven. It's more business and scientifically driven to understand the demographics, all the data required, look forward to what's actually going to happen. So if you make those 3 steps, you're not going to save it as a shopping destination, it's a community hub. You need to change some rules, and you need to write some plans. You might have a fighting chance of preparing our town centres for the 21st century. Now, the previous initiatives have all failed because they didn't have defined targets or measures in place. And that's the problem with the Portas town teams. They do not have defined targets, and they don't have measures in place to actually understand performance. The government must have a structured framework to complete to a timetable if you're going to get something done. And local people have to play a role in this, and not have it happen to them, but to make it happen themselves. And finally, creativity and innovation is vital to this. So I don't want to give you the impression that I want to stifle it, but I want to provide a framework for it to thrive in, and that's the important thing. And as a consequence of that, we produced 31 recommendations under headings called Making the Transition from where we are today to the future, creating a fairer, more economical, sustainable high street, change the rules, put the community first in the process, and then get a better managed framework in place to do it. And some of the, I'm not going to go through all these recommendations, but I'm going to pick out 1 or 2 of them. So if to make the transition, we need to make that acceptance that it's not a retail hub anymore, it's a community hub. We need to set an objective to get people living in the town centres and repopulate them. Now, here's an interesting statistic. When I'm 80, which isn't that far away, I can assure you that, might seem a long way to 18 years, but it's not long, all right? Trust me. There's going to be twice as many 80-year-olds in this country than there are today. Twice as many. What are we going to do with them? Where are they going to live? How are they going to be occupied? Who's going to pay for it? These are big questions that are unanswered. I can tell you that now. And the clue will be in our towns. That's where they should be. We don't want to create geriatric towns, I don't give you the wrong impression. But we do need to get that demographic living in the town centres as communities, freeing up the kind of spaces they're living in for the youngsters to come into. We have a housing shortage. And there's acres of empty shops and empty above shops in these town centres with a little bit of sensible will and planning can be converted to great places to live. So, to make that transition, you have to make that mental adjustment, you have to produce that plan, and you have to get the local community involved by presenting to them a 20-year vision of the town. Now, I'm not on drugs here, okay? 20-year vision of a town. What I mean by that is, what does your town stand for? What's your unique selling proposition? And if you go and ask that of local authorities, they look at you as if you're completely mad. But if you think about it, our towns are in competition with other towns. So what is the reason you want to go and live, work and play in Bristol? What would actually attract you to go and visit Bristol? What is the unique selling proposition that's advertised throughout the country? It's why we've got to go to Bristol next weekend to see it. I use Bristol because we happen to be here. In this book, we use Nottingham. Now, we studied Nottingham. They don't have a plan, by the way. But they have a brand to die for. Disney would kill for it. It's called Robin Hood. Well, you can't even find him if you go there. And it's grubby. It's got caves, historical caves. It's got a castle. It's also got a main train station, which they've just redeveloped and not thought about because it's a train station. Guess what HS1 is? Anyone been to St Pancras and the concourse? 56 million people go through that concourse every year. Only 12% of them are travelling internationally. The rest are either commuting in from down to London or actually visiting the concourse from the location to eat, drink, retail and everything. The dwell time in St Pancras has gone from 28 minutes when they opened it to 46 minutes when I interviewed them. People are doing their high street shopping on the way home or on the way to work. So guess what's happening to the high streets of all the little villages up the line? They're all getting smashed by this concourse. Now Nottingham allowed Railtrack to develop the station, and they've developed a station. And they've missed the opportunity to put an anchor at their town because they haven't got a plan. So if you're going to prepare for the future, you need to understand what we want as people going forward. Make the transition. Make it fairer. I'm not going to go miles onto business rates now, but if I told you that the business rate system in this country was not broken, it was not broken. It is broken now, but it wasn't broken. But the government decided to defer the 5-year valuation of properties for 2 years. They were supposed to do it this year for implementation 2015, and they're going to do it 2017. The net loser out of all of that was the retail sector. Of the 26 billion, I think it is, that's going to be rates income to the government next year, about a third of it is retail. So retail was a net loser in that decision. But within retail, there were winners and losers. And the winners were the 4 major supermarkets who stand to gain 1.3 billion of extra profit over 2 years. 625 million the first year, 675 million the next year. Now, that has to be wrong, because I'm talking about producing plans for the future and making the transition, but you need something to work with. If you've stuffed all the small businesses along the way, you're going to not have anything to work with, and you're going to have clone towns, and that's all you're going to have left, because the losers are the small independents in this, and they are going to lose considerably. There's a statement on Thursday, the autumn statement. The Chancellor will make a statement there. I predict he will freeze business rates to, sorry, not freeze them, he will cap them to a 2% rise instead of the 3.8% rise due in March, and he'll cap them for 2% for the next years until after the next election. The winners out of that are these supermarkets again, because they will make out of that £15 million a year amongst them. To an ordinary retailer, it's 200 quid. It isn't going to make the difference between you staying in business or not. So I say that because it is deadly serious, but people don't see it, and our country's lost its will to sort of stand up and fight for these things. There are other things like parking and stuff that I could go into. I'm not going to do it now. Putting the community first is a very, very important thing to do, and we need to make sure that we do that properly. We are creating towns full of charity shops. If you go and look at the high streets and where you get empty shops, they either get filled up now by betting shops, payday loan shops, or charity shops. And the charity shops get in there because of the rate relief. Now, if you've been to some of these places, they are actually selling clothes that are pretty damn good. Now, if you happen to be a clothes retailer next door, you're paying full rates and they're getting 80% relief. Oxfam is now a retailer and no longer a charity. They have a chain of retail stores across the country. Only 60p in the pound goes to charity. The other 40p goes to supporting the structure and the jobs that surround it. It has got out of control, and nobody is brave enough, because it's a political hot potato, to stand up to this. And then finally, better managed high streets. And this is where technology comes in. Now, the big change that we're all undergoing is technology. Yesterday was Cyber Monday. Something like £600 million worth of sales went through the internet yesterday. It would have been more had NatWest cards worked, but you know, they're government owned, so perhaps that's a reason, who knows. But the fact is that 20% of all non-food products now are bought online. I think in the next 5 years that will be 50%, all non-food products. So quite bluntly put, the UK has too much space, retail space, and it has to be addressed, and we need to front up to it. The retailers know that, Tesco know that. Tesco, I don't know if their results were today or tomorrow, somebody might help me, has anyone seen anything? I think it's tomorrow. They will show another poor performance, but it's missing a point. They are miles ahead of anybody else in terms of technology and online retailing. Miles ahead. They already have 47% share of online groceries. That's nearly half of all online groceries is through Tesco. They know what the future's about. Their new store in Watford is a community hub. Now there's a surprise. They know they can't use that space. They've got it. It's a fixed cost. So they've already laid plans to put in other activities to make it a day out. So they've got the giraffe restaurant, they've got the coffee shops that they've just bought, and they're going to get those licensed. So you'll have a glass of wine in there. Across the back wall, it's all for health. So you've got everything you need if you're getting old: ear people, eye people, teeth people. It's all along the back. And they've got a community area for Pilates classes, and it's mobbed. So they already know. They're miles ahead of the local authorities in terms of community hubs. They know what the next steps need to be. So technology is the key to all of this. And what we're saying to the local authorities, and this is, I'm getting now towards the end of this, what we're saying to local authorities is you need to produce this 25-year, 20-year vision. What does what's your town stand for? And then break that back to some milestones of how you migrate from where you are today to there. And then produce a 5-year business plan, detailed. And then have a public meeting and present it to the public out there. And then every year account for it and review it every 3-4 years to make sure you're on track. And then you might just stand a fighting chance of developing a town which will be a community hub that is fully wired, so they need to immediately go to free Wi-Fi everywhere. No black spots, actually works. Other than, I mean, if you've ever been on a train, it's terrible. They just don't work. So it's got to work, and then the traders and the other active people in that town, whether it be a gaming shop for males under 34, because that's what they do, they play games, get an academy in the town where they can teach each other, where they can compete with each other, like a youth club used to be in days gone by. Bring vibrancy back into the towns, it's just one example, and wire it up so that when you're getting there, your mobile goes off and they can talk to you. Now this is where the single most important message comes. The Millennials, as they're called, they're 13 now, and my granddaughter, who's 6, who said to me last Christmas, she was 5 in November, she calls me Papa, so you can imagine she gets what she likes, right? She says, Papa, can you buy me an iPad for Christmas? So I buy an iPad, it's under the tree, she opens it up, it's charged. How do Apple do that? I don't know. How do they do that? It's charged. Within minutes, she's into it like you never did see. All her friends have got them, the school's using them. She is not going to shop the way you shopped. She is going to go to big malls because they're growing up fast. Shops are not even going to have products in them. The future shops will have, she'll get there with her friends, they'll know she's in town because they can talk to her. They know that she's there. And they'll go into a booth with an experience. Now, if you've been to Apple, you know what experience is. It's no longer retailing anymore. There's no checkouts. It's an experience. Now, when you go into clothes shops, when she's 15, there won't be any clothes there. She'll go into a booth and she'll have a hologram fashion display for her and her mates. Be like a cinema. And they'll all be walking towards her wearing the clothes that they know that age group want. She'll say, I like that one, and she'll stand up in front of a mirror and she'll be wearing it. But not like, this technology exists now, right? But it's not very good, it's a bit flat. When she's there, she'll be able to do that and it'll stretch with her. She'll even be able to go to her mobile device, because there'll be gooey screens by then. The screen will change to the fabric texture. She'll be able to feel it. And she'll take pictures of herself wearing this stuff. She won't buy. She'll then go to some entertainment. She might go to the ski dome. She might go to the cinema. She'd spend a whole day there. Security would be fantastic. Parents won't worry about it. That's where we're headed, okay? And then she'll Facebook all her friends with, what do you think of that? She'll get a vote on it, and then she'll buy it. Now that is tomorrow's world, and that is what's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast. I tweeted today that Amazon are planning to deliver parcels, okay, using helicopters. It's not helicopters, I forget the name of them. Drones. Okay, that are £5 in weight and less, and drop them, at your doorstep. And they reckon they'll have that within 30 minutes of you ordering online in 5 years' time. Your high street has got a major, major transformation coming. Your communities have to gather together and decide on what you want. What do you exist for? How do you live, work and play? How does your economic blueprint work? How can you keep your economy local instead of having national chains suck money out? And there are towns that do it. I visit them all. I was in Totnes last week. I was in Penzance last week. And Totnes is a transition town. And they have an economic blueprint, and it's based on sustainability. And sustainability is a good thing. It's easy in Totnes because when you've got a bunch of PhDs, people living there that can exist on £1, it's more easy to do. But it's more difficult in Morecambe, where 1 in 3 shops are already shut, and the deprivation, the social issues in the public realm that are there, that are not being faced because they don't have a town plan. And so hopefully I've meandered through enough to stimulate some thought, some debate around the fact that from pounds, shillings and pence as a 15-year-old, we're in tomorrow's world, and it is as different today as you would expect. And that change is going to happen in the next 20 years. So watch out for it and be prepared for it and get involved with it and get your local authorities to do something about it. And that's about it, really.
Fantastic.